And we are live. Welcome to Olivia's Stories, ladies and gentlemen. Hi, Redditors. I'm about to take you on a journey of the situation I got myself in. The craziest thing happened to me, and it happened so fast. I'm so confused on what part of the story to start from because I can't think of the beginning. My brother, I'll call him Vic, who is a year older, never liked my husband. He never told me why, but he didn't like him, but he made it clear to me and the whole family. My name is Jasmine, and I am 27 years old. I am a soon-to-be divorcee, and it's all my brother's fault. When I was still 18, my parents had just taken the bold step of moving out of our old neighborhood because my dad got a better job offer. It wasn't easy, especially for Vic and I, because we were already in high school. And the thought of leaving our whole life behind was just absurd. A few days into our new school, Vic and I already dreaded it there because it was nothing like our old one. The bullying was a lot more, and to top it all off, it was miles away from home. It became a daily routine to go to school, get bullied, and go back home. That was the story until I met him. He introduced himself as Mark. He was charming, tall, smart, and something about Mark just made me feel safe. Whenever I was with him, I never got picked on. I wasn't the most attractive girl, so I wondered why he chose to talk to me. Whenever I asked, he said it was because I looked like I needed someone to talk to, and he was right. The connection was almost instant, and everything just felt a lot easier for me with Mark in the picture. When my brother noticed I was always with Mark, he warned me to stay away from him, but by then it was too late because I'd fallen head over heels for him. Mark and Vic were in the same grade, so I knew my brother must have had his reasons for the constant warning, but he never told me about them. Mark had already met my parents on one of the days he dropped me off from school, and they approved of a relationship with him. We started dating, but nothing seemed to change my brother's mind about Mark. 2 years had passed after that. I was 20 years and already done with high school. I finished late because I was held back due to the whole moving to a new neighborhood my parents did then. Mark engaged to me after, and I was so happy. He was a college student at a local college then. I never planned on going to college, and he knew that already. When everyone heard the news, the excitement filled the atmosphere. I felt the happiness from everyone except my brother, though he did try to put on a happy face for me. Within the next year, Mark and I got married with the help of everyone. It was a small wedding, and at the end of that day, my life with Mark officially began. Things weren't easy at the time, and I understood. He was in his finals and still took on a part-time job to be able to provide for us. It was a lot of work to do because I also worked retail, so I'd be able to help. Those days were slow, but we were thankful we had each other. Mark and I decided to postpone having kids until we were able to achieve a level of financial stability, and also preferably at a period where we would both be physically present for our kids. We continued living this way till another year passed until he was done with college, and this was a major milestone in our lives, as everything was about to change. I was 22 at that time. When Mark finished college, things didn't immediately become all right, so we both continued our various jobs. I really didn't mind that we did not have it all together yet, because at least I had my husband back to myself. I didn't know things were going to change in 3 years. We were living our normal life until one day when Mark suddenly got a call about a job opening with a salary proposal that would change our lives, but yet again, the job required us moving away and leaving everything behind. Of course, I was skeptical. We had a huge argument about it, and Mark assured me everything was going to be fine because we would be together. Eventually, we moved, and things took a downturn from then on. He was always working and never came home. Sure, I understood the fact that he had to work, and I was okay with that, but I wanted my husband back. For the first 2 years after the move, we tried to make things work. Sometimes he would come home for the weekend, and he'd bring all sorts of gifts, and we'd hang out and have date nights. But even on our date nights, it was one call after another. I felt so lonely again, and I didn't know how to handle it. I tried talking to him about it, but he was too busy with one thing or the other. And eventually, when we did, he told me that it wouldn't be permanent, and it was just until he could get enough to get independent and start out his own business. He said by then, we'd have all the time we need. I mean, I was just 25 at this point, and I already felt like I was losing my husband. I knew that I was just an average-looking woman. I had no really special features, while Mark, on the other hand, was a real package. I couldn't help but start to feel insecure at this point. I kept thinking, maybe he has found someone else. And maybe he doesn't really work all those hours and was really just seeing someone else. At this point of our marriage, we talked about having a baby on one of our date nights, and we tried, well, kind of. I mean, he was either too tired or too busy at this point, and that only made me feel more insecure. To no surprise, after a short while, we couldn't be bothered to keep trying. I always knew we both wanted kids and a family, so I didn't know how to deal with this, and I just wanted someone to talk to. I called Mark and let him know that I would be going back home for a while, and so I did. It felt good to see my parents again after about a year, and I let my mom know what was going on. She advised me to be patient and bear with it since it wasn't going to be forever. My mom was really fond of Mark at this time, so it felt like she was never going to take my side anyway. So I told my dad. My dad couldn't help much, obviously because he related more to Mark than myself, and that only broke my heart more. And so I turned to the one person who I probably shouldn't have. I turned to my brother. He was the only person who took my side, and I think that was all I wanted at that point. My brother and I talked a lot about what the last few years had been like. Vic called every now and then after Mark and I got married, but I could tell he was different. He never really wanted me to get married to Mark anyways, and it made sense that he'd change after I did. I couldn't understand why he had a problem with Mark since high school, but he never talked to him about it. Anyways, I just wanted him to be on my side. It might sound desperate, I know, but it made me feel a bit better. Vic told me he was sure Mark was out cheating, and I'd be lucky if he didn't already get someone else pregnant, and I just let myself accept it. Thinking back now, I should have probably said something, because maybe if I had said something, it would have changed things. Just maybe. I went back home to the city after a few days, feeling just slightly better after my visit, and I had my brother to thank for that. In the coming weeks, my brother and I would talk more and more frequently until it almost felt like every day we talked. When this was happening, my relationship with Mark hadn't become better. In fact, it felt like he had become more distant. Ever since Vic and I started talking frequently, I found myself antagonizing my husband instead of supporting him and being his safe space. I was failing to realize this also wasn't easy on him. I knew he loved me very much, but I couldn't just feel it. In the months that followed, I started traveling home more often, sometimes twice a month, and all because I wanted to talk to Vic. My dad asked me about what Vic and I were talking about, and I told him that we were just bonding after many years. My dad knew fully well that Vic wasn't a fan of Mark and was probably trying to protect my marriage from Vic, but I couldn't come to terms with it at that moment. Mark, on the other hand, definitely knew I was talking to Vic more often. He asked me too, but I just shrugged it off as nothing. Every time we talked, he probably noticed that I was getting more distant. We didn't talk much, but I was sure he could feel I was beginning to drift away from him in the past few days. I could tell because he was beginning to put in far more effort than in the last. He took days off, and we started trying to have a baby again. I felt a little better, and it began to feel like I was getting attention just because he noticed he was losing me. I felt like I could pull it off if I stayed away, but not too far away. I don't know if you understand. Just maybe I could get my husband back if he was scared of losing me. This thought would turn out to be one of the ending factors of my marriage. When I turned 27, I had already made it a habit of listening to my brother over my husband. My brother had become protective and imposing, and the things he said affected my marriage more than it probably should have. I knew this, but I was too far gone, and I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't even know if I wanted it to stop. I'd been married for almost 7 years, yet here I was childless and feeling a bit lost. I'd been a faithful stay-at-home wife for my rich husband, and though he worked less, I couldn't still really see him until Fridays. I knew his schedule offhand at this point. He'd leave for work on Monday mornings, stay at work till Wednesdays, and surprise me by coming home and then work till Fridays before coming home. It was an improvement, but spending 2 to 3 days in that large house alone wasn't just cutting it anymore. I went back to my parents' place sometimes, but definitely not as frequently as I used to. I didn't know the next time I would travel home, a series of events that would lead to the end of my marriage would occur, and all this would be caused by my own brother. I remember it as if it was yesterday. I called Mark and I told him he could work all week because I would be traveling to see my parents and Vic. Mark said he was okay with that. Now looking back, I wish he stopped me, but I guess wishes don't come true. I took my car keys and made the 10-hour drive to my parents' house. As usual, I got home after dark. I greeted them and went up the stairs to my room. I remember that my brother had asked me to come with some cute clothes because he wanted us to hang out together. I knew it was odd because I have never had to dress up to hang out with my brother, but I guessed since it's been a few months since I was home last. I thought it was because he really missed me and we were going to do something different. And I didn't let that bother me because I was completely exhausted from the drive and just wanted to rest my head. Before I knew what was happening, I slept off only to open my eyes the next morning. I had gotten a few messages from Mark asking if I was okay and if I had gotten to my parents' place safely. I replied immediately and told him I'd be home by the weekend and I'd love to see him. He replied that he'd see what he could do. Vic had already scheduled a meetup with me by 7 p.m. on the coming Thursday at a restaurant where we had met up a few times. I spent my time baking with my mom and running a few errands for my dad. Thursday came faster than I anticipated. By 6 p.m., I started to prepare and I wore my dress and put on very light makeup. I expected Vic and I to be going somewhere else after we left the restaurant because there was no way he'd ask me to come with a dress to a restaurant we usually went to, so I played along. I made the drive down and got there by 7:30 p.m. I was always late. I'm never the first person to get anywhere, and my brother knew me for that already. I walked into the store anxiously looking to spot Vic, and there he was in an isolated corner as I sat beside him and he asked for my car keys. I gave them to him feeling a bit suspicious because I knew he had his own car, but he said we were taking mine and he wanted to drive. I nagged him that we should go, but then he said he was going to go get something real quick at the counter, and that was when he walked out the door and I saw my car drive off through the window. I was still thinking this was some kind of joke or prank until someone walked up to the table where I was and sat down. It was Dave. Dave was a longtime friend of my brother. He was the first friend my brother made when we moved here, and I hate to admit this, but I'd always had a crush on him and my brother knew this. I was surprised to see him. Dave sat down and explained that he got a call from Vic to meet here and asked me what had happened, and it was then it hit me. My own brother had just set up a blind date between his sister and friend. I sat nervously in the restaurant, staring at the man sitting across from me. I had no idea what to say to him. After all, this date had been arranged by my brother, who had never approved of my husband. I felt guilty and nervous, but I also felt a strange sense of excitement. Dave had never spoken to me, not once, despite being my brother's friend for so long. He had always been handsome, and now he looked even better. I sat nervously across from Dave at the restaurant, and I didn't know what to say because my heart was racing. Dave smiled at me and said it was nice to talk to me because it had been long. I felt a mix of emotions, nervousness, curiosity, and a little bit of anger that my brother hadn't talked to me about this. I tried to put those feelings aside and focus on getting to know Dave. We were just hanging out, so maybe it wasn't a date. At least that's what I told myself to console myself. We had a little to drink, and by a little, I mean a lot, and by we, I mean Ty. Dave was so soft and open, and the conversation was smooth. He complimented me in between conversations, which made my heart beat faster. I knew what I was doing was wrong, but it just felt good at that moment. It was getting late, and it had started to rain heavily, so we had to leave. But with my brother gone with my car, Dave offered me a ride. I couldn't turn it down. I could, but I didn't want to. Dave felt so sincere, and he had an attractive aura, so I joined him in his car and we drove off. In the car, Dave told me that Vic informed him about my marriage, and he asked how Mark had been, and I shrugged off the question. I felt weird talking about Mark. Dave was meant to drive me back to my parents' house, but the rain was so heavy. He told me that his place was only about 10 minutes away from the restaurant, and the road was direct and easy, so it would be better to wait out the rain at his side than drive through the flooded roads. Some minutes went by, and the car came to a stop. The house in front of me looked unfamiliar. We were at Dave's place, and he rushed to get down. I got down right after and followed him inside. I really wasn't thinking straight anymore. It was pouring heavily at that time, and we were soaked and cold from both of us trying to get into the car and into the house. He brought towels for me, and he went in to change his clothes. That was when I made a move on him. I know I shouldn't have and I was drunk, but that's just an excuse I tell myself. I followed him quietly and watched from the door as he took off his shirt. Normally I wouldn't do that, but maybe it was the alcohol and I just wanted my strange sense of excitement. Up until this point in my life, I hadn't even seen another man's body other than Mark. As he took off his shirt, he turned around and saw me at his door, and this made my heart beat faster. The next thing I remember is waking up naked beside him the next morning. I couldn't believe what had happened. Sure, I wasn't the happiest wife, but I never thought things would get to this. I panicked and I grabbed my clothes, thinking about what I had just done. Dave woke up and offered to drop me off, but I declined, and I walked out. As I stood in front of his house, I waited for a cab, but none came, and after a while he drove up to me and offered again. I reluctantly entered his car. The drive was silent. He didn't say much, and neither did I. I just wanted to be back home with Mark, so that Friday I made the long drive home. I was surprised to meet Mark at home, looking ready to head out, and he was just as surprised to see me back home a day early. He was about to head out, but I held his arms, and for the first time since we moved here, I begged my husband to stay home with me. It was then that it hit me. I complained and I'd talked to him about it, but I never for once begged him to stay home with me. He immediately picked his phone and canceled his plans and stayed home. He was worried something might have happened, and of course he was right. But I didn't know how to tell him. One thing that remained constant over the years was that his ideals didn't change, and so I knew that if I told him, I'd end up alone, so I kept it from him. About 2 months passed after that, and I felt sick, and when I went to see the doctor, I was confirmed pregnant. I was terrified. I hoped and prayed it belonged to my husband, but I had my doubts. I told Mark about the pregnancy, and a few days after that, Mark quit his job. He wanted to be able to support me physically and emotionally throughout my pregnancy, and he didn't want to be an absent father. I informed my parents and Vic about it. They told others, of course. We got a few visitors during this period, and suddenly one day, Vic appeared at our place. I knew Vic was aware about what happened between Dave and I, and he made it obvious with the dubious smirk he walked in with. I knew deep down something was about to go horribly wrong, and without hesitation, I pulled Vic in, hugged him, and whispered in his ears, "Don't say a word," before letting go. Vic made himself comfortable and started talking to Mark in a familiar tone as if they've been friends for a very long time. Mark seemed suspicious, but probably thought Vic was finally opening up to him because of the baby coming. I was terrified the whole time, but then Vic stood up and gestured that he was about to leave. I let out a sigh of relief. As they were walking to the door, Vic said I should call Dave, and he had been asking about me. I glared at him, and he randomly asked if I had confirmed who the baby belonged to. My mouth fell open, and I watched Mark's face twist behind Vic when he heard that. Vic just stood there with an evil grin on his face, and Mark walked out and went to the room. I didn't know when tears began pouring from my eyes. I told my brother to leave, and I locked the door behind him. I ran to our room, and I was scared. I knew I had to tell Mark the truth, but I had no idea how he would react. I knew he was devastated, and I didn't want to hurt him even more. As I sat there, trying to figure out what to say, I took a deep breath and finally began to narrate my whole ordeal. He was devastated, and he almost cried. He walked out on me and drove off to God knows where. He didn't come home that night. The next morning, Mark was back home. He told me that he was going to see through the pregnancy, but if the child wasn't his, we were getting a divorce. I was scared. I didn't want to lose him. At the time, it was due in 7 months. It took forever, and even though Mark was supportive throughout that period, he definitely changed a bit. I went into the labor room, and after a few hours, my baby was born, and the DNA test was done immediately, as instructed by Mark. It was a beautiful baby girl, and I cried. The DNA test came back, and as I feared, the baby wasn't his. I told my brother and parents about it, and they were all devastated, except Vic. I got discharged from the hospital and went home with my baby girl. I haven't thought of a name for her yet. My family came over to help me with the baby, and I informed them about the divorce. Mark told me he was going to stay away for some days when he found out the baby wasn't his. I hope he wouldn't go through with the divorce and he would change his mind. Update: I regret what I did and I wish I could change everything. If only I was a bit patient with Mark, things wouldn't have become like this. Mark came with the divorce papers and I had no choice but to sign it. He blamed himself for not giving me time, but I said it wasn't his fault. I knew it was all mine. Vic tried cheering me up, saying it was for the better, but I lashed out at him because it was all his fault. We were both raising our voices, and my baby girl started crying. He told me that it wasn't his fault I slept with Dave, and I knew that was true. I told him to get out of the house. My parents had left some days back to go back to their job. They told me to come with them, but I told them later. It was just Vic and I with my baby. Vic said I should at least try to contact Dave to tell him it was his baby. He gave me his number and I said I wouldn't, but I did. I called Dave and his reaction was surprising. He said it wasn't what he planned and he was sorry. He told me the best he could do was provide me child support. I felt like a silly person, and I cried. I named my baby girl Anna after Mark's mom. Mark left me with the house, but I felt so empty. I decided to move back to my parents' house. It would be more helpful if Mom helped take care of Anna considering the situation I was in. Vic came to apologize about what happened because he knew about what Dave said. I still regret everything I did, but I'm grateful for my baby girl, Anna. To everyone reading this, if you feel yourself becoming distant with your husband, speak to him and fix it. Don't try looking for help outside.